Hello, I'm Stacy Smith, and welcome to another edition of Around the Table, Politics 2020. This is where we discuss a lot of things that have to do with politics and some other things that just may come to our mind. Joining us is our regular panelists, and it consists of former Pennsylvania Governor, Republican Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as State Attorney General and also served as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Governor, thanks for joining us once again this morning.
Thanks for having me.
On the other side of the table is Amanda Green Hawkins, who is a Democrat and served as a national committee woman for the Democratic Party representing Pennsylvania. And Amanda also is currently an attorney for a major union that is based here in Pittsburgh. Amanda, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Stacy. Good morning.
Good morning to you. And going back across the table on the Republican side, we find Chris Fry, who is finding out firsthand what it's like to be a politician and also serve the people who elected him. Chris is the mayor of Newcastle. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Having me.
And finally, we turn to the great philosopher, and that is Joe Mystic. I'm not quite sure which philosopher I'm going to call you today, but we'll just stick with what we had the last time, and that is that you're just a great philosopher. You also happen to teach law at Duquesne University. Joe's background in politics is very varied as well. A longtime Democrat, and both in front of the cameras and behind the scenes as well. So, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you all.
All right, let's start with something that happened this morning, and that was a ruling by the United States Supreme Court that basically cancels the Trump's cancellation of the DACA immigration program. DACA provided, of course, benefits to undocumented immigrants who were brought to the United States as children. The High Court ruled the Trump administration did not provide sufficient reasons for canceling this particular program. So, Joe, let's start with you because you're probably going to be very familiar with this. I can say this going in, that this affects a lot more of the country than necessarily Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh does not have that kind of an immigration situation as many other parts of the country does.
Yeah, that's true, but it's a great American question. You know, it has to do with what our country stands for. We are a nation of immigrants. This is protection for innocent children of refugees who came to America. And it's only right that they be protected. There was an interview just after the decision was issued with a young man from out west who was a paramedic, and he just came in. He says, I don't have a lot to talk about regarding the decision. I'm very, very pleased, but I just came back from my tour of duty as a paramedic. That's who these dreamers are. They're part of the fabric of America. Now, there's no question that this is part of the Trump campaign to undo anything and everything that President Obama had to come up with, and he's made those comments on numerous occasions. This one can hurt him in the upcoming election, however, because it does emphasize the fact that he is resisting the American way of life, the great American traditions of our being a nation of refugees and immigrants.
All right, he just teed it up for you, Governor. Doesn't this indeed hurt the president coming up?
Well, I'm sure he's not pleased with it. I'm not completely surprised by it because I think, as we talked earlier, the Chief Justice was the deciding vote and I think wrote the opinion. Although I think by many on the left, he's considered to be a ultra-conservative. He really isn't, and he's been keeping to his sworn oath to uphold the laws he sees and interpret it. As whether it hurts him in this election, we're only going to find that out when we get to the election. However, those who support him are not going to change from this position. Those who are opposed to him are not going to change. They're going to feel good from this position. And the question really comes down to those people in the middle, the ones that he was able to get in the first election. Will he be able to get them back right now? Too early to predict something like that.
Amanda, does this put the issue of immigration back to the front of the campaign?
I think it makes it one of those issues at the forefront because there are so many issues that are impacting people's decisions right now where they stand on the two presidential candidates. So I think it's one of those it's one of those things that will push this up to one of the top issues. And like we heard, we are a nation of refugees, a nation of immigrants. And so this is something that a lot of people will be able to relate to, I believe, no matter how many generations their family has been here. So I'm happy with this decision, of course, with the Supreme Court today, and I'm sure that there are many others who are happy about it too.
All right, Amanda, thanks. Mayor Chris Fry, You, as the only elected official on this panel right now, have to deal with these kinds of issues every day. Your thoughts on what happened today?
I just see, reading a couple of these articles this morning, it seems like, given the circumstances that we're in, and I'm on the trenches every day in terms of being an elected official, the circumstances that he's faced with, especially the coronavirus. I see the Supreme Court, that decision being something that it's bringing all those things together to make that decision. You might have doctors that are fighting for coronavirus at this point. You have youth, you have families and friends. So those things are being taken into consideration right now. Do I think it's going to affect him in the long term with the presidency? I'm not sure. It's definitely another one of those hits that are going to affect make people think a little bit more about who they vote for.
So basically, what you're saying here is you feel that the coronavirus is going to be more of the overriding issue in the fall, more than the immigration issue or some others that come up.
Yeah, especially with the policies and stuff that are being kind of, I don't want to say creeping through right now, but people are going to pay close attention to what policies are coming through the pike, especially when you have such a large national issue, global issue such as Corona. So I'll say Corona is going to be the deciding factor for whatever policies that are going through right now, especially if it's involving millions of people at one time.
Another big issue, and this we're going to refer to the latest Quinnipiac poll of those surveyed, and this has to do with basically how police do their jobs and how people feel about African Americans and how much they are discriminated against. This latest Quinnipiac poll we're going to show you, those surveyed, 68% to 27% say that discrimination against blacks in this country is a serious problem. And you break that down, in the view of 96% of the Democrats polled, they feel this is a major problem, and in 69% of the independents. However, only 34% of Republicans feel that way. And you break that down even a little bit farther, 62% of whites feel there is a discrimination problem, 95% of blacks. I'm going to tee this one up for you, Governor. Your thoughts?
I'm not surprised by the numbers. I think if that poll would have been taken even a year ago, I know some of it is from 2 years ago, the numbers have been growing that way. But particularly following the two incidents that we now have, those numbers definitely bear out that people are focusing on it. Question is, will they continue to focus on it? I think they will. I think this has been a watershed moment. I'm sure Amanda and everybody can comment on that, but I think that you're going to see some change. Question is, how much change are you going to see? You're going to see some change in attitudes by a lot of people. Some people, there's a core people, they're not going to change their attitude one way or the other. That's just, I think, part of what's going on in this country.
Amanda?
Well, I think that race will play a big factor in this upcoming election. People are noting the disparities in race and income, socioeconomic status, all based in race, all rooted in race. And I think that with a lot of the things going on, that people are changing some hearts, changing some minds, and it's going to have a big impact in this election, especially when we look at how the Supreme Court is deciding decisions based on things that the current president is trying to do. And a lot of that people see as being rooted in race as well.
All right, Joe, I'm going to pose it to you this way. Another part of that poll also indicated that by a margin of 55 to 38%, those polled believe protests around the country calling for an end to racial inequality will lead to some meaningful reforms. You've seen protests through your years. Will this indeed lead to meaningful reforms, in your opinion?
It's generally the way that we make social progress in our country. We have big moral issues that build up over time. And then suddenly there's something that triggers great change. In 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant got perhaps the first piece of civil rights legislation through the Congress in about 3 weeks to address some of the crimes that were being committed in the South against African Americans, former slaves. Again, in 1965, with the Voting Rights Act. President Lyndon Baines Johnson got that act approved within weeks, again, after America watched the beating and the rushing by mounted police officers of peaceful demonstrators who were trying to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. And that prompted great change in a matter of weeks. Now, again, there's something that's happened that's in full view of the world that is prompting these changes. And this is the way it happens here.
All right. Mayor, I'm going to pose this one part of the poll to you, and that is how people view police. You've had some incidents in Newcastle. You've had some protests and demonstrations there as well. 49 to 44% of the people approve the way police do their jobs. That's down, though, from a poll in April of 2018, in which 65% of the people polled approved of the way they do their jobs. Your thoughts on that, Mayor? How do you feel the people in Newcastle feel about police and how they do their job?
I think there's a pretty, if I could say, there's a 50-50 split. And, you know, we have our African-American population who are here. And we saw in our protests who, you know, I think they acknowledge that there's a need for police reform. Do our police have some issues and do some socially unjust acts? Absolutely they do. But I think when you always go back to the reform part of it, is being open and bringing somebody to the table, or bringing people to the table from both sides. And that's one of the big, coming into office, one of the big questions that I had in terms of who my police chief was going to be. It was somebody who led with the notion of community policing. And I'm proud to say that we have somebody here that does that, and it was displayed in the 4 protests that we had in our community. And we just spoke this morning about forming a community review board in our city. So Newcastle, you know, I just believe that it's a problem across the country, across the nation, and again, Newcastle's not exempt from that thought process. And we all agree that there's something needs to be done to talk about it. And then I think it's the conversation needs to be had, and it can't be swept under the rug. We can't turn a blind eye to the fact that, you know, there is abuse of power, and no police force is exempt from that, including Newcastle.
Well, let's stay with you, Mayor, for a second here. There are calls for what is being termed defunding the police department, shifting dollars away from some police activity into social services. As a mayor of Newcastle, your thoughts on trying to shift any money like that? Favor or opposed?
As a mayor of Newcastle and as a master's level social worker, I don't think that we need to defund completely. And the term defund, I know it's used not necessarily as completely taking the resources out of the police force. I believe it was Camden, New Jersey, defunded their police force, but it was to root out the corruption and to root out any injustices that were taking place. I do believe we can be strategic in what we do with the dollars that our police has, and just put funding into ways that we can support them. So as a social worker, do I think that there's some of the great ideas that are out there in terms of having police or social workers and police in cars when they go to certain cases? Absolutely, especially when you're dealing with women and children or family and children, when you have rape cases, when you have domestic cases, things of that nature. You have somebody there that you could call on immediately. But I don't think it's required to do through defunding or shifting funding just within the police force. I think there's other avenues such as private dollars, grant dollars, and we can an opportunity to see. I think defunding is more towards, you know, when you want to root out corruption in a department. That's where you kind of start from a blank slate and then rebuild from there. And I don't think there's not too many departments across the country that would have to go that route. Amanda,
your thoughts on this?
Well, it's timely for me in more ways than one. I was recently appointed by Mayor Peduto of the city of Pittsburgh to his community police task force, looking at police reform. And yes, there are people who are understandably anti-police, interested in defunding because of issues with the police in their communities and how policing is done. And there are people in the community, in my community, who love the police, who believe that the police are doing a great job. And it all depends on how your interactions have been with the police force. And for many people of color, for many Black people in particular across the country, many of those interactions have not been good. We have to be honest about that. I am a Black American, I am college educated, I have a JD, and I understand that there is no zip code, no income level that can protect me from the effects of racial discrimination and from certain behaviors should I be stopped by the police sometimes. And we talk about this all the time, there are officers who do a great job, and there are officers who don't. And it's those who don't that often cause the rest of the police force to wear that, to have that negative stereotype or negative consequence from the community. And I would say that there is a little bit of truth in it. There is. We have to face that.
Governor, I'm going to bring you in on this part of it because with your background, not only being governor, but also the state attorney general and the U.S. attorney for Western District of Pennsylvania, your perspective on this.
Well, we don't have enough time to go into that one. I'll shorten it to this. It has been a prevalent problem for a long period of time. I endorse what Amanda just said. There are officers that do a great job, and I dare say the vast majority of the officers do a great job. But there are officers that don't do the best job. Maybe they let their personal prejudices get in the way. They're not under control or whatever. But we have people like that in almost every profession, if you think about it. These people, though, are in the profession of enforcing the law and arresting people and taking them to jail and prosecuting them. And so they're right out there on the tip of the spear, and everybody is looking at them. And incidents like this cause it to increase. On defunding, I agree with Chris. Not defunding. You may want to rearrange some money. I think we need to do more on social working. I think Joe will agree with me on this. When we closed up a lot of the mental institutions 25, 30 years ago, a lot of those problems went to the street, and a lot of police officers became social workers or had to do social work. And they shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing their law enforcement work. There should be social workers that can help assist with that. So this is a much bigger problem than just saying we're going to defund or we're going to move money here or there. And we're not going to fix it in a week. We're not going to fix it in a year. But if we agree to work together, we can improve it dramatically in a shorter period of time than if we just ignore it.
And if I could add, Stacy, yeah, defunding is not going to be the solution. And when we pay attention, when we listen to what the activists are saying, many of them are saying that this is not just about quick fixes and trainings and implicit bias classes, things like that. This is about trying to root out systemic racism in the police department. And if we think back to those images embedded in people's minds of George Floyd on the ground with an officer's knee in his neck, and not only that, but his hands in his pocket in a casual type of manner. Everything about that behavior says that this is something he was informed was okay to do. Something about it let him know this was okay to do, which is why he appeared to be so comfortable and casual about doing it. And that's what people want to see rooted out.
Can I add one thing to that? And I just want to add that that's a cultural thing, I believe. And I've talked to my chief about it. The culture of the FOP, Fraternal Order of Police, that, you're protecting your brothers, you're protecting yourselves. And that's a breeding ground for that type of behavior and that type of thought process. When you just don't think that, when you don't know if you won't get reprimanded by certain things that you do or certain actions that you take. And I think that's a breeding ground for negative behavior, and whether it be racist, sexist, classist, whatever the case may be. And that's what we run into in any profession. If you feel that you can act whatever behavior and there's not going to be any consequences to it, that's what happens.
Joe, I want to bring you in and put the question to you this way. There are efforts underway on both the Republican side in the Senate and on the Democratic side for some sort of police reforms. So already both sides are saying that, you know, one doesn't go far enough or one goes too far. Will we see any reform come out of this, Joe?
Well, I think we will definitely see reform. It's tough to resist this, I guess, tidal wave of belief that something needs to be done. You know, defunding is probably a good conversation starting point, but you know, it's not really a legitimate solution. We all know that we did not put all these responsibilities on the police purposefully. That was just a convenient place to put them when we shut down the hospitals, as the governor said, when we had other societal problems emerge. So maybe it's the right time, and maybe we will get this done this time, to begin to re-examine some of those decisions we made out of convenience or perhaps economy, and try to do them right.
All right, I want to bring this now into politics if we possibly can, and that is that we take that one issue alone, where it breaks down about defunding the police department. According to this Quinnipiac poll, if you break it down, the Democrats support the idea of defunding the police. 70 to 24% of the Democrats feel that way. On the opposite side, the Republicans, 86 to 10% oppose defunding the police. So where I'm bringing it into politics is most of these issues are breaking down on political sides. Will we see this become a factor in the presidential or congressional elections coming up?
Stacy, if they use the term defunding, are you in favor or opposed to defunding? I wouldn't put any merit in the poll results, because nobody even knows what that means right now. If we're talking about redesigning our police efforts and finding new ways to address priorities, and then assigning some other priorities to train professionals in those other areas, that's a different matter. And it's a complicated question, perhaps not one you can really poll.
I think on that level, in terms of politics, and you look at the legislation of the Justice Act that just came out and they just unveiled yesterday, the accountability, and I'm talking from the ground. What I heard from the folks in my community is that they look for accountability. Who's holding these people accountable? And some of the stuff that we talked about, I think only like 40% of police force use of force records make it back to the FBI. You know, that's a very low number. And I think some of the legislation, such as the Justice Act, will be able to open that up in the legislative portions of making folks feel more comfortable than knowing that their local police force will have an overarching accountability by the federal government.
From a philosophical standpoint, it's going to be very hard to get that compliance, but I believe one of the ways they can get that compliance is where it comes to money. The federal government provides a great deal of money to state and local governments when it comes to police enforcement. And they could condition their continuing contribution to those departments upon the condition that these people supply the information that they've been asking for, and now Chris says only 40% has been provided. That's one of the fastest ways to get people's attention. Those police departments that still refuse to do that, well, then you got to start looking at the leadership within that municipality or that city or that county or that state as to why they aren't pushing to get this compliance. Getting police officers and police agencies to reveal that kind of information, Joe knows this, we've been working on things that's always been difficult. But when it comes to money, that oftentimes gets their attention and gets some compliance.
Amanda, I'm going to pose it to you this way. We just talked about DACA, the Supreme Court ruling on that. We've been talking about race relations within this country, defunding the police department, moving monies around. As a former national committee woman for the Democratic Party, where do you go with this for the campaign coming up?
And I'm sorry, Stacy, you're speaking in terms of all of these issues and how do they affect the candidate of choice?
Well, how would you, as a party official, use some of this coming up in the fall?
Well, I think that the way you use some of it is to appeal to your base, appeal to people's humanity, to what moves them. We talk many times about voting and elections being an emotional matter, and these are highly emotionally charged issues for people. For Democrats, we're talking about families with immigration. With coronavirus, we're talking about health care and economic disparities and people dying. And with police reform issues, we're talking about people's lives being at stake, whether it be an officer, whether it be someone who's in police custody who passes away. And you appeal to people's humanity. And these are issues that we have seen have already gotten people stirred up all around the country. And we just reinforce the idea of what our candidates are going to do about these issues affecting people where they live, work, and play. And that's how you turn out your voters and turn out people to vote the way that you need them to in November.
All right, I want to bring this one up. We only have about 5 minutes or so to go, and that is, this was a column by Nate Ashworth of Election Central. He cites comments from the director of the Pew Research that pollsters are undersampling the demographics that turn out in higher numbers for President Trump and oversampling the demographics that will turn out higher for Biden. And the case in point, the Pennsylvania presidential primary, in that, yes, Joe Biden had some competition. He had 78.5% of the vote of Pennsylvania here to get the secure the nomination for Pennsylvania. Donald Trump, on the other hand, also had some opposition. He had 93.4% of those who went to the polls in support of him. So, Joe, are we seeing an undersampling and perhaps oversampling already?
Well, that's an accusation that comes up every election cycle, and I suspect we'll hear more of that now. The numbers, in polling are skewed by many different things, and one of them is the degree of sampling. We also have at least 1.5 times more Democrats in Pennsylvania than we have Republicans. So when you compare those two primary results of the party's leading candidates, it really doesn't explain much to you. So you have to read polls very carefully. There's a lot made of the fact that in the last election, the pollster said that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and she did win the popular vote. So the pollsters weren't all that far off the mark. She won the popular vote. She lost the race, of course, at the end of the day. But polls have to be taken with a grain of salt.
And really, the only poll that counts is the one in November.
True.
Yeah, that's what we say over and over again. The only one that matters is the one in November. And again, what happened in 2016 tells me that we really have to be careful about relying on these polls and getting comfortable. Well, oh, my candidate is way ahead. It really doesn't matter whether I vote or not because they're going to win. You can't do that. We saw what happened in 2016, and this whole idea of undersampling, oversampling is valid. It's a valid point. And so everybody should go vote on election day, no matter what a poll is saying.
All right, we're 5 months away from it, and we'll let Mayor Chris Fry have the last word on this. Mayor?
I agree with you. I saw it in my election and in my community, and we're seeing it in a lot of other communities. I think he who does the work, wins the trophy and gets out there and really connects with the people and lets the nation know, they're here to make a better America and do things that are right for the people and for the voters who are going to go out. I'm big on engagement. I'm big on folks staying a part of the process, because ultimately that's what it boils down to, is who goes out and who's able to informatively make a decision on who's going to be our next leader.
All right, lady and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for Around the Table once again, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.